You ever like be sitting back reminiscing, or like thinking about some crazy times or like crazy situations that you've been in and shit? But I was I was thinking about this one time back in Philly and shit. Me and my man Miz, we was chilling down my old neighborhood and shit where I had lived most of my life. You know what I mean, down North Philly and shit. And we was down there chilling, and we was smoking, and like it was like these new apartments that they had built, like a new little development that was at the top of our street and shit, or at the top of the old street I used to live at and shit. And it had like a little area that was like sectioned off with like a big wall. You know what I mean, at the top of the block, like a big wall, like a little half wall, like this, like about, you know what I mean, yay high. You know, you could stand up and see over it or whatever. But it had two benches in there, you know, one on this side, one on that side, like that and shit. You know what I mean, one like with your back to the block, and one like with your side to the block. You know what I mean, like that and shit. And we was out there chilling and shit. You know what I mean, it was it wasn't late at night, maybe 10 or something like that. You know what I mean, we was just out there fucking off and shit. You know what I mean, and we were sitting there smoking and shit. You know what I mean, on the benches and shit. And fucking, it was people out there and shit, you know what I mean? But a couple of niggas that lived out there and shit, the boy T, and I think the boy name was, but they was out there and shit. They was standing on the corner and shit, and further down the block and shit, like down the end of the block, you know what I'm saying? You see these two dudes coming up the block and shit, you know what I mean? But you know, we just sitting there smoking, we ain't paying no attention and shit, you know what I mean? And plus, it's like a small, you know, like little area, you know what I'm saying? Like that, like the streets is real small, you know what I'm saying? And it's like a real close distance to everything and shit. So you can pretty much see as soon as somebody come on like the next block, you know what I'm saying? Because it's so small, you know what I mean? So like when the dudes came up, it wasn't nothing to, you know, see them coming up and shit. But they coming up, and I hear T, he say to the boy, he like, yo, something, whatever the boy name was, yo, something, you better not come up here. Man, don't fucking come up here, man. You know what I'm saying? The boy say something back or whatever and shit. But we really not paying attention. You know, we sitting there, me and Miz talking and shit, doing our thing and shit. But you hear them on the side and shit. And he say, you know, something, nigga, you know what I mean? Don't come up here, da da da. And I look down and shit. You know what I mean? This one's starting to get my attention and shit. And I look down, and the two dudes that's coming up the block and shit, I noticed that one of the boys, he got a long ass trench coat on and shit. You know what I mean? Like one like the Neo Matrix type, you know what I'm saying? Like long trench coat and shit. You know what I mean? And but they still like a little ways down the block and shit. You know what I mean? But you know, they arguing back and forth this and that. And I'm sitting there with Miz and shit, and we smoking this and that. And next thing I know, you hear T saying, "Yo, nigga, I said don't come." Wow, and the shit like caught me so like off guard and shit. Like I'm smoking. And it's just said, wow, I said, oh shit, and like, oh, like, you know what I mean, the shit, they going in and shit, so immediately and shit, you know what I mean, I think, you know what I mean, like, all right, when they start copping and shit, I scared the shit out of me, you know what I'm saying, I dropped the weed and all that shit, and Miz was sitting in this bench and shit, like with his back to the street and shit, and I was sitting in the bench, like with my side to the joint and shit, so like when they started cutting and shit, Miz took off immediately and shit. Like, you know what I mean? Just straight this way and shit. You know what I mean? So I didn't see like when like the initial like when they started shooting. I mean, I wasn't looking right at. You know what I mean? I just heard that. You know what I mean? So when they started cutting and Miz took off and shit, immediately I started thinking, damn, he taking off because they coming over here and shit. You know what I mean? Because where we was sitting, that was like the only like shelter. You know what I mean? Like the only, you know what I mean, cover and shit. Like the base, the headquarters and shit. You know what I mean? That niggas could get in and, you know what I mean, could cutting because like down the block it ain't really shit to hide behind and shit. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking that damn, these niggas coming over here. You know what I'm saying? And Miz see him coming, so he took off and shit. But I ain't had time to like react as fast as he did and shit. So like when they started cutting, I was like trying to get up, but I like fell down and shit. You know what I mean? So I like fell like you know what I mean, right by where the bench was and the wall right there and shit. So when I fell, I just like got up close to the wall and shit. You know what I mean? Like down, you know what I mean? Down on the ground by the wall and shit. It's a thick ass cement wall. You can't shoot through that shit. You know what I mean? Down by the wall and shit. So I'm laying there and shit. And I'm still thinking like, damn, they gonna come over here and shit. Like them niggas, you know what I mean, come hop over the wall, you know what I'm saying, get behind and, you know, cow, ducking, cow, you know what I mean? I'm stuck right there with the, you know what I mean? So I'm laying there and shit, and I'm like, damn, you know what I mean? What the fuck, you know what I mean? And I remember I'm laying there on my back and shit, and I could hear him cutting this, cutting, going back and forth and shit. Cow, 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 goom, 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 cow, cow, cow. And I'm just like, oh shit. And I'm laying on the ground, and I remember that, I'm laying on my back like this and shit, and I'm looking up at the sky, and it was like a nice night too. Like it was real starry, and no clouds was out and shit. You could see all the stars and shit. And I'm sitting there laying on my back, and I'm looking up at the stars and shit, like, oh my God, man, this shit's crazy. Just hearing these niggas just cow, 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 boom, boom, boom. Yeah, and the one boy, like you could hear him yelling and shit. He's like, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, let's get it on, huh? Boom, boom, boom. You know what I mean, like that was back when like when that Gravediggers song was out, the RZA and them had that group, the Gravediggers, and he'd be like, yeah, let's get it on, huh? And watch the spot get blown. Yeah, and that joint. Boy was like, yeah, let's get it on, huh? Boom, boom, boom. And he's shooting and shit. And I'm laying there, and I'm starting to think like, damn, man, I mean, eventually these niggas, you know what I mean, gonna come over here and shit, because they sound so close, and you know what I'm saying? And like, it wasn't like long, but a couple seconds seemed like an eternity and shit, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking like, damn, eventually they're gonna come over and shit. I gotta get up, I gotta get out of here and shit, you know what I mean? So I muster up the courage and shit, you know what I mean? To get up and take off real fast, because you might get up and, all right, let me get, and you know what I mean? That's a done deal, you know what I mean? But, I was like, all right, I gotta get up and shit. So I got up and I take off running and shit, like, the direction that Miz was running and shit. And I take off that way and I'm running. And as I start running and shit, I'm starting to like pass cars, you know what I mean, that's parked right there in the little driveway or whatever and shit. And I'm running past the car, and I see Miz duck down and shit, like he ducked down behind the car looking like this and shit. Like, yo, you know what I mean? So I'm running past the car, and I'm like, yo, Miz, come on, let's go. And grab this nigga and shit, and we start running and shit, like, you know what I mean, running straight out the driveway. It's still like a little ways out of the driveway and shit. And we running and shit, running, and we look over and shit, and one of the boys that was shooting this nigga running the same way we running on the other side of the, you know what I mean? So we all running the same direction and shit, you know what I mean? Like, oh shit, so now we gotta try to outrun this nigga and them, you know what I mean? So we running and shit, I mean, running, you know what I mean? Get down to the end of the joint, and we cut real quick and shit, you know what I mean? That nigga cut the other way and shit, and we running and shit, you know what I mean? And got down to the next block and shit, and we slowed down and shit, and walking and shit. And like, oh shit, yo man, what the fuck, yeah? I was like, yo man, why you leaving, man? Why you ain't tell me? He was like, yo man, I thought the niggas was gonna come over there, man. I was like, yeah, me too, man. I thought they was too. He was like, yo man, I fucking took off. Yo, I ducked behind the car and shit. He was like, yo man, I seen that whole shit, yo man, that nigga with the trench coat, man, that nigga came out. That nigga had a shotty, yo. That nigga was like, blue, yo. That nigga was going back and forth, yo. That shit was crazy. I was like, yo, yo, why you ain't like keep running this shit? He was like, man, I ain't gonna leave you and shit. I was like, ah, yeah, you right and shit, you know what I mean? But he was like, yeah, man, I was sitting there watching, man, my head was poking out like a target and shit, you know what I mean? I was just watching the whole shit, you know what I mean? But fucking, he was walking and shit, you know what I mean? And he was like, yo, you still got that weed and shit? And I was like, nah, man, when they, you know what I mean? I was hitting it and the shit popped off and I don't know, that shit flew wherever the fuck, you know what I mean? And he's like, yeah, you wanna go back and get that shit? I was like, yeah, let's go back and get this shit. So we started going back and shit, you know what I mean? And we went back around there and shit. By then the niggas was gone and shit, you know what I mean? And maybe like a few people, poking their head outside, what was going on, shit like that. But I went back around there, and the weed, it was still there and shit, you know what I mean? In the general, area where you know what I mean? It was still right there and shit, you know what I mean? So we got that shit, rolled out and shit, you know what I mean? Walking and smoking and shit. Like, yo, that shit was great, yo. That shit was great. Yo, I love you, man. Nah, but yeah, that shit was crazy.